What the hell has happened to giant robots? Mecha is one of the most famous and well-respected genres to ever exist in the medium of anime. For a good amount of time, giant robots weren't just synonymous with anime, giant robots were anime. Trying to imagine this medium without giant robots is almost like trying to imagine Star Wars without lightsabers. Its lineage is about as old as anime itself and is full of prestigious titles that have shaped the medium as a whole. Whether you're a mecha fan or not, you have felt the effects of this genre. Every decade brought new classics that have ingrained themselves in the hearts of the anime fans of their era, and this was no different for me when I got into anime in the mid-2000s. Code Geass, Gurren Lagann, Eureka 7, Full Metal Panic, Gundam 00, Rasafon. These weren't just good mecha shows, these made people into mecha fans. These are up there some of the most iconic anime of their decade, and as with every previous decade, there had always been a fair few mecha shows that have helped define that period. So going into the 2010s, we all, as usual, waited for the next big mecha franchise to rise up as it always had. And so we waited. And waited. And waited. And then everyone in Japan just became truck drivers. The 2010s has been the most barren decade for mecha in the history of mecha. In an era where we have more anime coming out than anyone can feasibly keep up with, this year there have been a total of 3 new TV mecha shows. 3. There was less mecha this whole year than half the number of isekai airing this season. And I can also say that in this whole year, there's only really been one big mecha show that's been released. Neon Genesis Evangelion. That's not even a joke. How did we get here? 2 years ago I did a spotlight on mecha, mentioning its seeming decline in popularity, but ending it on a sort of optimistic tone of, mecha isn't exactly relevant right now, but maybe things like Darling in the Franxx might save it. Let's quickly refresh our memories about how that one turned out. But now that the decade is almost over, I wanted to take a deeper dive into looking at mecha as a whole in the 2010s, and trying to get to the bottom of what exactly happened to one of the most iconic genres anime has produced. And I think a good place to start as any is the most iconic franchise in this iconic genre. For as long as I can remember, Gundam has been the flagship mecha franchise, responsible for many people's introduction to mecha, and it actually had a fantastic showing this decade. Between Unicorn, Thunderbolt, and The Origin, we had some of the best the franchise has ever had to offer for fans of the Universal Century timeline. Then potentially the most impactful Gundam series has been the Build Fighters and Build Divers spin-off, when I assume some guy at Bandai was looking at model kits and was like, hey, what if we made Beyblade but with Gunpla? And then someone was like, does that technically count as mecha? And he was like, who the fuck cares? It's gonna sell a shit ton of Gunpla. And then they sold a shit ton of Gunpla. But the pattern you may notice here is that while they were all great shows for Gundam fans, you actually had to be a Gundam fan. Though Unicorn and Thunderbolt can technically be watched by newcomers, they were OVAs set in the Gundam timeline with a lineage that spans all the way back to 1979, which isn't exactly the most newbie friendly, and to gain hype there needed to be a show that appealed to both newbies and veterans. There was an attempt, with Gundam Space Africa, Iron-Blooded Orphans, being one of the more accessible series Gundam has ever had, but for whatever reason it just didn't take off, which leads me to honestly think that maybe Gundam as a franchise is just too vast and intimidating for newcomers now, no matter how many reboots, new timelines, or spin-offs they add. So that begs the question, is there any other beloved mecha franchise that could have taken up this mantle? Probably the biggest franchise was Code Geass, sporting a spin-off OVA and certain Resurrection film, I'll get back to that later. Eureka 7 had a sequel every Eureka 7 fan pretends doesn't exist. Full Metal Panic also got a sequel, 13 years too late for any fan to actually remember what was going on, and yeah, I think that's about everything. Meanwhile, in Macross Land,
no mecha allowed. I repeat, no mecha allowed. We idols only now.
So that leaves all the new and original IPs that came out this decade, and to give you a good idea of the sample of what we had to choose from, here are the most popular mecha shows of the 2010s according to Mal in ascending order. SSSS Gridman, Robotics Notes, Knights of Sidonia, Undefeated Bahamut Chronicle, Ava 3.0, Susei no Gargantia, Out No Zero, Infinite Stratos, Darling in the Franxx, and at number 1, Guilty Crown. Yes, the most popular mecha show of the last decade was Guilty Crown, and that's barely even a mecha show, but even ignoring that, if there's an immediate pattern to be seen here, it's that a fair few of these had a lot of hype and buzz around them and were actually delivering. All they needed to do was to cross the finish line in competent fashion. And, oh great, they just broke their fucking ankle. Guilty Crown was the first real one to get that ball rolling and was immediately a huge hit the moment it was released. It looked incredible with some gorgeous character designs, an interesting world, some of the best animation production IG had to offer, and still has one of my favourite soundtracks of all time. This was my introduction to Hiroyuki Sawano's work, which I feel is only appropriate because it definitely had a Sawano-worthy drop in quality when after about halfway through the series, the protagonist decided it was time for a scene phase and the series just kind of went... Next up on the list of Shop Till You Sawano Dropped the Ball came Aldnoah Zero. This show had so much potential and probably way too much hype and anticipation on the build-up. We had a brand new studio in Troika coming out with an original IP mecha series that was backed by names like Geno Robuchi and Fate Zero's Ei Aoki, that started on an absolute bombshell that blew everyone away. Especially this guy. This was going to be the fire truck that put out the dumpster fire Guilty Crown had left on the mecha genre, and we were all ready for it. Oh god, what are you doing? Oh, what the fuck's going on? What have you done? Oh god, you just made it 10 times worse! And of course, most recently, there was... And, well, you already know how the story goes. What all three had in common was this trend of setting up this really interesting world and premise in the first half, only to completely shit the bed with batshit plot twists and absolutely awful character writing to derail the success of the series and hamper any possibility they had to be taken seriously. But here's the thing, Guilty Crown, Aldnoah Zero, and Darling in the Franxx are all kind of guilty pleasure shows for me, because looking back, I still ended up enjoying all of them, but not for the reasons I really wanted. There was a time I was genuinely invested in all three of these shows and had really high hopes they could turn into something great. And then, after I got over the initial anger and disappointment that every single one of them had taken a turn beyond saving, I just switched off my brain and enjoyed the experience of watching how big of a train wreck they could become and the resulting shitstorm they caused. And that kind of sums up my enjoyment of mecha this decade. It hasn't been one of awe and amazement. It's the same kind of enjoyment you get from watching the trashiest reality TV show about people who every week finds new and original ways to fuck up their lives in a way you thought could never top the previous week. Something encapsulated by every new franchise Studio Sunrise tried to make. Being the mecha studio, the biggest original Sunrise mecha this decade was probably Valvrave the Liberator, which basically felt like Sunrise looked at Code Geass, thought, what if we just take all the ridiculous plot twists from Code Geass and make a show about that? And then they did, resulting in this glorious dumpster fire you thought couldn't get more stupid or ridiculous with each passing episode until it just proved you wrong, which I think is perfectly encapsulated by this one comment that says, I don't think we'll be seeing sex in an anime like this, and then literally one episode later, out of nowhere, a character just gets full-blown goblin slayed. Predictably, it did stir up some controversy, so a year or so later, Sunrise was like, you know what, we can fix this, I have a better idea. So they looked at Valvrave, thought, what if we just take this one rape scene from Valvrave and then make a show about that? And they did, and it was called Crossange. However, I don't really want to give the impression there wasn't any good mecha shows this decade though, because there was. Aside from Gundam Unicorn and Thunderbolt, which I've already mentioned, Code Geass Akito the Exiled was fucking brilliant. Arguably the most visually interesting and exhilarating action series mecha has ever seen. This could have been so much bigger if it just didn't air as an OVA series over 4 years released with an inconsistent pace. As for standalone TV series, there were a handful, it just felt like they all came with an asterisk next to them. Suisei no Gargantia was a solid Geno Robuchi written show, but its mecha element was limited to essentially just Chamber, who was often more an actual character than a war machine. Star Driver was a gorgeous looking show with giant, thick robot hips, but it was very divisive. Some people absolutely loved it, but I feel it got a similar amount of hate at that time as well. If I had to pick a favourite original mecha this decade, it would probably have to be Gridman, which had elements of the over-the-top hype super robot shows that in my opinion was some of Trigger's best work. But I feel that would be cheating a bit because it's so deeply rooted in the tokusatsu genre, so saying this is my favourite mecha show of the decade would be a bit like saying my favourite Transformers series is Power Rangers, but I don't really have any other choice because everything else was just okay. And that's kind of the story of the decade. Every good mecha show seems to have been tied to an OVA of a pre-existent franchise no non-mecha fan would go out of their way to find, or are shows that don't really feel traditionally mecha. Which is also where I'll add all the mecha harems or mecha musume shows, because I feel the purpose of a mecha show isn't to make you actually want to fuck the giant robots, right? Right? So what does this all mean for this iconic genre in the future? Well, to be short, I have no fucking clue. Looking forward, the only new big development I see is the literal resurrection of a 10-year-old franchise in Code Geass, with plans to continue it for another 10 more years. I've yet to see it, but I've actually heard a lot of positive things about the Lelouch of the Resurrection movie, but even so, as much as I love Code Geass and the original cast, I'm not sure I want 10 more years of Code Geass, or at least I don't think I want 10 more years of Lelouch. The only way I can really see this franchise working is if it goes down the Gundam route, where you have new stories that take place in the same universe further down the timeline with a completely new cast that can explore entirely new things. And maybe have the old cast appear here and there as cameos or supporting roles, because if you're going to resurrect the old beloved cast to have them carry the franchise for the future, it plays into the exact same problem that has plagued this genre in this previous decade. You are just appealing to pre-existing fans rather than making new ones. There's going to be more Gridman, more Patlabor, more Knights of Sidonia, but that doesn't really mean much. I'm sure Mecha, especially Gundam, has still had a super profitable decade in selling drones and drones of model kits, but that was never really the problem here. The most glaring issue about the last 10 years is that I feel there wasn't really any show that was going to convert people into Mecha fans. While Mecha was by no means all bad, it was something that was hard to appreciate if you weren't already a Mecha fan, which is why in today's fandom, within the vast pool of anime fans that exist nowadays in all variety of tastes, if someone tells me they're hardcore into Mecha, my gut reaction is just, huh.
Okay, boomer.
Because as a Mecha fan, all you can really do right now is look to the past. Mecha might be a genre with a huge history, one so rich that most Mecha fans will always have something great from the past they can pick up, even if there's nothing to look ahead to, but without those shows in the future to capture new fans, all we'll be doing is looking back. While it might be easy to say that every hype show just didn't deliver, or Gundam just doesn't have the same pull it used to, or CG ruined Mecha, I'm afraid that it might just be the simple case that traditional Mecha stories just aren't as appealing in this day and age, but that doesn't mean it needs to be. I feel like the genre is waiting for something like that Breath of the Wild moment, that one show to reinvent it into something more relevant and really change the perception of how Mecha can be viewed for modern audiences, something it had always been able to achieve before. I normally try to end these videos on a hopeful note, but at this current point, there isn't much I can grasp onto when looking towards the future. I'm not even that big of a Mecha fan, and yet even I feel there's been a glaring hole that's been missing in modern anime. And unfortunately, only time will tell if there will be a future for the iconic giant robots. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much this month to Elifal, Robert Harnborg, Basil, Lauken, and everyone else on my Patreon for helping to support me for this month and making this video possible. So, I've got a small thing to discuss with you guys today, and that is I'm not sure if I'm going to be making an anime in 2019 this year. Or at the very least, it's going to be late. I know, that's probably disappointing to hear, but I do have my reasons. Firstly is I kind of just want a Christmas holiday this year. This is my 7th year in a row doing it, and I think I've just hit my limit of working from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep every day except for Christmas. So I kind of just want to relax a bit this year. Second is, I've always seen this video series as a big celebration of everything that happened in the previous year, and it's unfortunate that I just didn't watch as many anime as I wanted to this year, so it's going to take me a lot of time to catch up. And right now I don't know if I have the energy to put all this effort into a massive project that I know is going to take me a lot of time for something I already know is going to be late, rather than putting my energy into something next year. So I'm still unsure if I'm going to make one this year. At the very least I'll do a best of 2019, but whatever I choose, this series has always been like my baby. It's my passion project because it's never been monetized, it's always copyrighted claims because I use copyrighted music, so I never make a single dime off of it. I'm just really proud of my work with this series, so unless it's going to be the best it can be, I'm just not going to make it. And I'll just take a year to reset and I'll do one next year. So yeah, that's just an update of my progress. Hope you guys understand, and you'll find out what the result is by the time my next upload goes up. So until then, I'll just wish you a happy new year now. I hope you had a wonderful Christmas, and I'll see you guys next time.